Just a little bit about Hannah's to get us started. Um, we have been around since 1988, helping families with a number of challenges. And our mission is to strengthen the San Diego community by preserving and building resilience in families, whether they are living together or living apart. We envision healthy communities, strong families, and thriving children. That's our vision certainly for our community, but also for the larger community we all live in. And there's an email contact there in case you want to follow up and learn more about our transition services. Today, the topic of the webinar is create peaceful resolutions with your mate. And just a little overview of some of the things we'll be touching on today. Mindset matters, what to know before you commit. And it's never too late to go back for most things, by the way. Conflict in relationships for better or worse. Sweat the small stuff. Power tips for fighting fair. And relationship repairs. And then we'll focus a little bit on the end on takeaways. So what do we mean by mindset matters? Well, here's mindset matters number one. Speak in draft. We are constantly learning, changing, and evolving. And I love the sign on the lower right there. I love being right so much, I change my mind when I'm wrong. So speak in draft, leave space for yourself to revise your own thoughts and opinions. And very importantly, leave space for your partner to be able to do that as well. Let's look at mindset matters number two. Speak from the I. Now, most of us have heard use I statements, right? And have a sense of what that is. However, I want to go into it just a little bit more to get us all in the same mindset today for this webinar. We want to make a commitment to try to avoid generalizing. Always and never are lovely but awful examples of that. Speaking on behalf of our partner or telling our partner how they feel and what they are thinking. And the finger pointing is very much an example of that. When we're upset, when we feel hurt, vulnerable, disappointed, disregarded, the impulse sometimes is to point to the other person and say, you did this to me, right? We'll go into this obviously more today in terms of tips. But if we compare this graphic with this graphic, you can sort of see from their faces that they're probably having a serious discussion. But what do you notice? You notice that they are sitting next to each other. They have physical contact. His arm is on her shoulder. She's leaning sort of into him. And so even though we can tell from their faces that they're having a serious discussion about something, you can see that this is a more collaborative way of being in perhaps a disagreement with each other than this. And so part of the mindset matters is when I'm upset and in disagreement with my partner and I really need to talk with them, I'm going to try to ground myself first and remind myself, this is my perspective, right? And I need to leave space in many ways for my partner to be able to speak from his or her perspective as well. So speak from the I. At Hannah's, we always have 3 takeaway goals, and they are validation, refresh, and new growth. So what do I mean by that? I am hopeful, as I always am, that today I will share some things that validate amazing things that you're already super good at, where you say, I got that, I'm really good at that. I hope that I share some things that remind you of things. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I can't hold on to that, but I've tried it before. I know it works, so great. It's fresh in my mind now. And then new growth. I hope that at least some of you hear things that are new for you, where you say, wow, I'd love to try that. That might work, and so on. So those are my 3 takeaway goals for our gathering today. I want to talk a little bit about foundational pieces for a committed relationship. And remember, I said for most of these things, we get a chance for do-overs. That's one of the beautiful things about relationships, right? So, what do we mean by your partner's not going to complete you? I don't know about you, but I think of Disney stories for this. And I think really what this means is that we need to focus on what's important to us as individuals. Now, not in a way that disregards or leaves out our partner, but in a way where I make it clear um, that I am taking care of myself and you, my partner, have the space and same ability to take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, if we are both taking care of ourselves to be our best self in the relationship, guess what? Then we really are both going to bring to the relationship strength and resilience building for each other. Be aware of the expectations you bring into your relationship. So I think that three of them that stand out for me are that, my partner's going to meet all my needs for companionship. That I don't think or I don't believe that romance should fade over time. And that I don't believe that my partner's interest in sex should be different from mine. And so, one of the ideas here that I have found to be helpful in working with couples is something called an expectations inventory. And again, this can be done at any time in the relationship, not just at the beginning, but essentially that you sort of agree with each other that what may be operating here that's making it hard for us to communicate or creating these little divisions between us is maybe we're not clear about our own expectations and certainly have not been clear with each other about our expectations. And so an expectation inventory is a wonderful way to sort of bridge that gap. And you won't always feel in love. I think in my experience with couples and in my own life is that there's an ebb and flow to feeling in love or feeling deeply, deeply connected. And that's a natural thing in all relationships, but certainly in intimate relationships. What the most important thing I think is that the values, the worldview that we share that brought us together is what is the most important thing. And so, of course, this also means, in addition to sort of talking to each other about this concept of not always being in love, it's important to talk about our values and how we see the world. And then the last one on this page is your partner's family relationship is key. We all bring our families into every place we go as grown-ups. One of my favorite books in the whole world is Home Away from Home, which describes the way in which we all bring our family dynamics into the workplace and recreate them there, again, for better or worse. And we want to know what are our partners' relationships like with the family? Is there closeness? Is there distance? Was there conflict in the family? Some of you may have heard of the concept of adverse childhood experiences, basically childhood trauma, or even child trauma in relationships prior to coming to this relationship. But the family relationships in particular are critical because that's what lays down our very foundation, neurologically, cognitively, emotionally, and so on from the very beginning, long before we can remember. Know your partner's finances. This one is super important. And I'll tell you what most folks who counsel couples recommend in terms of a healthy relationship is to reveal all. But that both of you disclose your entire financial situation. And part of the reason for that is most couples have a much harder time talking about money than any other topic. And so once you get it all out there, then you can really make a plan and you can sort of discuss, are we going to have separate accounts, if you will? I almost said checking. That's a silly notion, isn't it? different accounts. Are you each going to manage your own money and contribute in the middle? Are you going to share everything? Um, so I think it's fine to do it either way. There's not like a right or wrong way to do it. But if secrecy, maybe even shame, holds one of the partners back from really just being open about finances, it is something that will set the couple up for some sometimes very significant conflict later on. Conflict is inevitable. Okay, so this also, by the way, relates to family of origin. It's inevitable. And I need to make a commitment to myself and to my partner that I will recognize my role in resolving it. And part of what that means is I know or need to become self aware of my own vulnerabilities, my frailties, um, my weak spots, my idiosyncrasies, and even that shadowy negative side of me that comes out when I am in a high stress situation where I'm survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, right? I need to be able to recognize that. And I need to talk about this with my partner to see if they do as well. One of the reasons that's important is that so many of our stressors, there are stressors that are external, right? Traffic. There are stressors that are internal. I had a particular experience with my mother or father when I was growing up, or a particular loss at a critical time. There are all kinds of things that happen in our growing up years that influence us. And so it's more about me owning my own insecurities and discomfort and not projecting those onto my partner, or in some ways, almost worse, being defensive when those are clearly happening between us. All right. And then the final one, express love. I'm sure that many of you have heard of the books about the languages of love and that each person has a different way. And I do believe I think in theory, there's 7 of those. Here's the thing though, expressing love is vital for any of us as human beings. We need to know and hear and feel loved, cared about, important, vital in someone's life. One of the things I really like, and I'm in a little while, I'll give you some reference to that. John Gottman Institute, they've done tremendous work over several decades in terms of identifying a variety of things about couples. One of the really positive ones is what is called the 5-to-1 ratio. That for every negative interaction a couple has, they need to be thoughtful about having 5 that are positive, that are sort of life-giving, life-affirming, and affirming each other. So essentially, for every negative one, 5 positive ones. And so the positivity is really important because some people will say, well, I married you, didn't I? Or I'm not going anywhere, am I? But that's a very distant, disconnected, and really sort of cold and unempathic idea, because yes, I felt loved by you at one point, but we need to continue, both of us, nourishing and nurturing that connection that we have. All right, I'm going to just do a little pause and reflect here. And it's an opportunity to sort of think about the ideas that I've said. And again, think of it in terms of, I'm really good at that. I've been reminded that I do need to focus on that more regularly, especially when conflict might emerge and anything new as an idea. And Daniel, do we have anything at this point that anyone has shared with you?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So I encourage you to share as we go along. And obviously, it's not mandatory, but I think it would be, if you're having a thought about something, it's very likely other people are too. And so would just encourage you, when something comes to mind, just put it in the chat to Daniel. All right, so let's talk about conflict. So what do I mean by for better or worse? Facing conflict can build a relationship. It can increase our resilience. And most importantly, it can build and increase and strengthen our connection with our partner. And later on, I'm going to talk about some fair fighting guides that can really stand any of us in good stead. Ignoring conflict can destroy a relationship because feelings build up and then resentments blow up. And almost always that means destructive fighting.
Susan, can I just interrupt real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, so one of the questions in the chat was talking about just being generally conflict avoidant.
Yes.
So many of us feel that way. I was curious if you had some thoughts about it.
Yeah, very good question. So it's interesting that I got to this slide. This is the Gottman slide that I refer to, the Gottman Institute. And at the end, I'll give you a link that's very helpful. So there's actually been a lot of research on that, avoiding conflict. And unfortunately, a common habitual cycle that many couples have is called a negative cycle. And the reason for the negative cycle is one of them withdraws when there's conflict, one of them pursues when there's conflict. So conflict avoidance, it relates to the previous slide in terms of ignoring conflict, avoiding conflict, pretending as if it's not there. Most often leads to a buildup in feelings, a buildup in resentment, or a buildup in whatever the feelings are. Feeling isolated, feeling ignored, feeling abandoned. It can be any one of a number of things. But if a conflict is avoided, and by conflict being avoided, what I mean by that is this is going to be a difficult conversation, right? I need to make sure we're both in the right mindset for this. I need to be thoughtful about the timing and so on. These are all the things that have to be in our own minds. And yes, you're right. Many people avoid conflict, and very often that is a good example, I think, of what happens in families, right? In the families we grow up in, we all learned from an early age how to deal with conflict based on the way we saw our parents handle conflict. And it's not an easy thing to change a childhood pattern. It's often referred to as reparenting, meaning a real restructure, trying to reparent ourselves to fill in the gaps, to develop muscles emotionally that just weren't developed because of just my family being what it was. But honestly, it's one of the reasons that couples therapy early on can be super helpful and really important because it can preserve a relationship. Unfortunately, what many couples do is they wait until it's too late, until those feelings have built up, have become solidified, the resentment has turned into contempt and so on, which brings me to the slide. The Gottmans are able, and their research has been replicated, refined, broken off into different pieces with different groups and so on. They can predict divorce among newlyweds from the first 3 minutes of a marital conflict discussion. And the greatest predictor of divorce for any couple are these 4 things: contempt for each other, in the face, in the voice, in the posture, contempt, criticism, sort of a constantly critical, negative, looking for what you did wrong, blaming you. It's never me, right? And both partners in a couple are going to do these things. Defensiveness. The instant our partner says, can you stop that? Or I don't like that. Defensiveness. And we start defending and talking and explaining and rationalizing and so on and so forth, and really trying to push them away and make them stop. by the way, that individual is the one most likely to be the pursuer in the relationship, the defensive one, right? The conflict avoidant one is the runner, the withdrawer, right? They would just want to get away. So here's the cycle, right? In the middle is the couple. And so when conflict arises, all of a sudden they're doing this because one of them's pursuing and one of them's withdrawing, right? It's called the negative cycle. And it's actually a specific finding in couples research. And the good news is there's some evidence-based therapeutic interventions that really can make a huge difference and teach the couple how to recognize their negative cycle and, most importantly, their own behavior. Because believe it or not, only one person has to change. Now, the other person has to be willing at some point, but somebody's got to decide to change. The fourth most destructive behavior in a couple's relationship is stonewalling, just refusing to speak, right? Just cutting off the other person and going, sometimes, I mean, I certainly have heard of people going a week without speaking to each other, without touching each other, pulling away from each other, sleeping in different rooms, and so on and so forth, stonewalling. And then, whoops, sorry, there's three that really relate to the same problem area where divorce is likely or separation with a committed relationship. Those other three are being overly affectionate as newlyweds. And the measure is other people are uncomfortable being around this couple because it's just like everything's a little too much. The second one is withdrawing during conflict. So this is the withdrawer. This is the person who gets up right in the middle of a disagreement and walks out and keeps going, will not return. And then finally, people who are pretty constantly describing their most intimate relationship in a negative way. This is going to other people and complaining about your partner, right? And not talking about it. This is not someone who's talking about it with someone to talk it through, to get clear in my own mind. You know, what do I need to address? What don't I need to address? So that I'm prepared to go back to my partner and talk to my partner about these things. And so part of what happens is all of the energy that belongs in that relationship, even though it feels tense and conflictual, that energy ends up getting invested over here with these people or this person that I always, every day, I can't wait for my partner to get out of the house so I can complain about him. And this is research based. As I said, it's been replicated over many decades now. And I know it's probably shocking to hear that 3 minutes of a marital conflict discussion among newlyweds, this can be predicted. Because these measures were identified so long ago and have been around so long, there's been a lot of experience with this. Okay, so here are three. I'm hoping that just let me know, Daniel. We'll have a pause and reflect here in a little bit for others who are weighing in. So here's some of the essential agreements that me and my partner need to bring. I can forgive and forget, no grudges. I can compromise without retribution. Our resolution can work for both of us. This relates to storing stuff, holding stuff, letting it build up. It's really important in a couple's relation to sweat the small stuff. No problem is too small. And so notice when I call it a pinch. Notice when you feel a pinch, it's a little like, ooh, ouch, or just, I didn't like that. Pause, reflect, and decide. Don't just move on. And so the pause is, wow, that really sort of hurt. Reflect. I think I want to say something, and then decide. Because when you're reflecting, you also decide how you're going to say it and when you're going to say it. And then finally, you pick the time and share it with your partner. Sweat the small stuff. Any thoughts, comments here?
Susan, in regard to sweating the small stuff, can you give some examples about that? it seems there's maybe a little feeling about not knowing when to actually understand when it's a conflict and when it's something that we should look at and how to, how that interplay works.
Yeah, so I think this is what's so important about noticing. And often with couples, what happens is, again, a lot of this depends on habits and ways in which our brains and our emotional intelligence developed over many, many years, being as we were raised up. Um, but it's important to notice our own reactions. So it's not so much this external thing over here that we're talking about. It's something is said or done, and I have a reaction, and it feels uncomfortable. It feels hurtful. Um, it makes I end up feeling disregarded, disrespected, and so on. That's a pinch. And then the small stuff is if my partner just said something to me in sort of a cavalier, unthinking, unempathic way that hurt my feelings, it's possible that that is really important to address, especially if I do an honest inventory when I reflect and I realize that this has happened over and over and over again, and I haven't said anything, especially then. So I think that's one of the cues, right? Yeah, we don't address every single thing. But most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we know what the patterns are. And we even sometimes self talk. She's going to say this, she's going to do this. I know that when I come home, et cetera, et cetera. So when you notice yourself thinking things like that, I think that's a very good example of, okay, yeah, you may be intellectually telling yourself, oh, this is no big deal. This is just small stuff. But pay attention to your talk, your self talk, your own thoughts, right? And if that's what's going on, oh, or maybe after it's said, what you're thinking is, oh, of course, that's what he always does, or that's what she always does. Yeah, pause. That's a pinch, and that's a pinch that has to be addressed. So it's hard to give specific examples, but I think that sort of process and sort of paying attention to ourselves and those kinds of thoughts and feelings, and especially that little inventory of, wow, yeah, this happens a lot, and I've never said anything, and I can tell I really need to say something. So hopefully that helps with a little clarification there. This stuff is complicated, obviously. All right, so I'm going to go through some power tips for fighting fair. So the first one is we commit to practicing healthy anger. Or I'm sorry, part of this is me managing my anger, right? In couples relationships, remember that pointing at each other can happen so quickly. And as soon as that happens, there's really often not a way to connect, right? And so healthy anger means that I notice when I'm angry and I don't just lash out. And if I do lash out, we're going to look at a variety of fair fighting tips um, that allow us to get some space, step away in a healthy way, and so on. Um, and so part of my responsibility, if I say, yes, I am going to practice healthy anger, is I need to be honest with myself about what is really going on when I'm angry. Am I feeling threatened? Do I feel disrespected? Is my anger covering up disappointment or hurt? Because honestly, very rarely is anger the first emotion. Something else comes first, and then anger comes. And so it's my responsibility to figure out for myself effective communication tools and skills so that my partner can experience my anger in a way that doesn't damage, doesn't destroy, and that still maintains some sense of space and safety for both of us. The second one, we will discuss our differences only when we are sufficiently calm. We agree to cease the discussion if either one of us feels too agitated or threatened. I will refer back to that pursuer and withdrawer. So sometimes when people are feeling agitated or threatened during a disagreement, a fight with your partner, um, it's it builds to a point where one of them can't handle it, or maybe both, they just can't do it anymore and they walk away, right? Here's the thing. I like the idea of a 1 to 10 comfort versus discomfort scale interpersonally, right? And so the general rule of thumb, 1 is completely comfortable in this discussion. 10 is I'm going to explode. I can't handle it anymore. Uncomfortable. So each one of us needs to learn when we get to hopefully a 4, but maybe at first it's going to be a 5 or a 6, to stop. Now we'll talk in a minute about some techniques for that. It's super, super important because harm is done by words spoken in anger. And I'll bet every one of you right now can remember an exact moment and exact words of someone very close and important to you who hurt you by the words that they said in a fit of anger or an impulsive moment. The other thing related to this is just watch yourself. If you always have to have the last word, that's not a good sign. Because what it means somehow is that you're the one who can finalize this. You're the one who really knows the final thing that's most important to say, right? Compromise can work for both of you. Okay. So here's a couple of other power tips. This first one is really helpful, and can actually be when you're calm and not fighting, fun to decide. So you agree on a word or a phrase or signal that you will use if either of you need to disengage and stop for now, right? And so one example, a couple who both really love dogs, they would say puppy paws. That was their word. Another family, another couple, came up with using turtle. Number one, the family loved turtles, but here's the other thing. A turtle pulls into its shell, needs to retreat to regroup, right? So for that particular couple, turtle was the word that they used. And honestly, choosing a whimsical word when you're calm and affectionate with each other, and then using it, you'd be amazed at how helpful that can be. But for goodness sakes, do not try to come up with a safe word when you're at the height of a fight. But it's really important to do this, because what it signals is that commitment to healthy anger, right? It signals I'm done with this for right now. I will come back to it, right? I will come back to this, but I've just got to stop for now. Okay, the next one. Let's say that a fight breaks out. It's often during transitions, leaving for work, getting in the car, going on vacation. Sometimes little transitions, sometimes big ones, because that's often when we're sort of at our most distracted, our most vulnerable, our most sort of disorganized or laser beamed. Here's the thing. It's important to talk about. It really doesn't feel good when we have a plan to go, let's just say just go to the beach, right? And somebody freaks out because somebody forgot a beach ball or a who knows what, right? And so conflict. The person who's conflict avoidant or wants to withdraw from any kind of conflict because it makes them feel too vulnerable, they're the ones who's going to take the car keys and walk in the house, very morally superior, say, well, I'm not going to go now, right? That is that's a destructive way of stopping an argument, but most importantly, it really cuts off the opportunities to do relationship repair, which are vital to happen after a conflict. So the idea is to, and again, talk about all these things with your partner, because we all know these things happen. And I'm sure you have examples from your own relationship that are probably going through your mind right now. And make a commitment, but also make a commitment to check in with each other. Because sometimes, depending on what hurt or disappointment or whatever it was that got triggered, one of the people or both of the folks really see that they need some solitude, right? It's important, if at all possible, to stay in the same house, just go to different rooms. And again, agree to whatever the relationship repairs are that work well for you, that work well for your partner, to be um, to be forthcoming to begin that repair and also be receptive. Okay, so if we decide to stop a discussion without a resolution, absolutely fine, critically important to do. Remember, words hurt, and some words get seared so deeply into memory, they will never be forgotten. It's very hard to heal, and it's very hard to forgive because of the intensity and destructiveness of the words. So stop. But the agreement with each other is we will resume. We will always resume. We will not leave a conflict unresolved. The second one, be mindful of time limits. When a fight breaks out at 8 p.m. in the evening, there is a potential that it could go on for hours, that both people will lose sleep, that they'll be miserable and dysfunctional the following day. If that same fight breaks out at 8 a.m., everybody's on a schedule, they have some place to do. And so it's much more likely that they're going to say, you know, I've got like 15 more minutes, and then we're going to have to table this until later, right? We're going to have to come back to it. And so notice that in your own cycle and pattern. Begin to notice. I encourage people to write this stuff down. Begin to notice when tempers flare. Begin to notice when you're likely to feel a way that makes it hard for you to contain yourself in a healthy way. And then finally, a power tip for fighting fair. We will not argue in the bedroom. So let's talk about that a little bit. Number one, bedrooms are for two things. They're for sleeping, resting, replenishing, and they're for deeply connecting with physical intimacy. One of the things that's really, really difficult is when the bedroom becomes the place where couples argue. It's important to remember that our emotional mind is not well connected to our logical, rational mind. It's just the nature of being human. And for all of us, our emotional mind is much more reactive when we're tired, when we have gone too long without just basic physical self-care. And there's been a very recent research study that found that if couples are tired, even one partner who doesn't get enough sleep, they are more likely to experience conflicts, and they will empathize less with each other. So more conflict, less care, less thoughtfulness, more likely to lash out, use words that do harm that is very hard to repair. So we will not argue in the bedroom. Now remember too that withdrawal and pursuing pattern is important to recognize and be honest with yourself about, because that is a destructive couple cycle. Agreeing to disagree is healthy. Taking a break when the conflict hasn't been resolved and you agree there's more work to do is healthy. Becoming so enraged, so hurt that one of you leaves the argument completely and is not going to return to it, that is one of the most destructive patterns for couples. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about in a moment is relationship repairs, because once the conflict is over, it's super important to repair that. I I love the metaphor. It's been helpful for me personally of a tapestry, or in my case, I'm from Iowa, and rag rugs were something that I saw my German um, grandmas and aunties and my own mother making around the kitchen table. And I still have my rag rug from kindergarten. And it's the idea that these tapestries that we weave as a couple together, um, they get little tears. They can get frayed as we build and weave together. And when that happens, it's important again to recognize that and knit up the frayed ends. And that can mean much different things to different people. But that relationship repair we're going to talk about. I'm going to stop for a pause and reflect here, see what thoughts people have, maybe questions or ideas or questions.
I'm curious, Susan. There's maybe some talk about the seriousness of what we bring into our couple. Can you talk a little bit about like having lightness and humor and something about that in relationship to these conversations?
Yes. So, first of all, we have to have a sense of humor about ourselves. Truly. We all have idiosyncrasies. We all have behaviors and habits that are annoying to other people. And we are much more likely, just like children, to be at our absolute worst in the place that we feel the most comfortable, the most trusting, and so on. What is that? That's home, right? That's with whoever my home is. And so self awareness is the way you get to humor, because the very best thing is being able to recognize, like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that again. I know that that doesn't even make any sense. It's irrational, right? So I'll give us a couple of specific examples, so that what does that do? It's me opening up and saying, I know this is ridiculous. I know I always do this. And I am giving you permission to observe this to me, not in an attacking or critical way, but shared humor. Because if I own it, if I open up to it, right? I'll give you an example myself. So remember the first Mindset Matters I presented today? It was speak in draft. Well, I was raised in a particular kind of family where speaking in draft was something that would have gotten you, not only gotten you nowhere, but you would have been crushed basically. And so it was a dysfunctional family. But what I learned is that I had to speak very clearly and very definitively in order to be heard, in order to be seen, in order to be listened to. Now, some people might develop that kind of a thing as a habit. Unfortunately, it's in my cells, it's in my DNA. And so, and the other thing, I talk too much. Sometimes I just talk too much. So a long time ago, fortunately for me, I am older, I learned that I had to give the people closest to me permission to reflect to me when I'm doing that. And but I have to give that person permission. And obviously, that means I trust them enough that they love me and they care for me and they will be kind with me about it, right? But then, you know what happens? That's me saying, I know I do this. I don't see it or I can't hear it when it's happening. So please, please, right? And so it's okay if people say, can you hold on a minute? I have an idea I want to share. And if you keep talking, I think I'm going to lose that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you and this is always my response. Thank you so much for asking that. I have a habit of doing that. And I stop and I listen, right? That's one example. But I became aware of it because I was committed to self-awareness. I was committed to learning about my annoying ways and so on. And trust me, that particular habit behavior, learned behavior from my family, because it started so early, and goodness knows I saw it modeled very powerfully in my home. Um, it's not something probably that is ever going to go away. But I made a commitment when I was much younger that I realized my lack of self-awareness was hurting me and it was hurting other people. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn about myself in relationship to others. That's how you end up with a sense of humor about it. Now, the other thing, some people are just brilliant, witty, kind, and empathic and have a sense of humor that is kind, empathic, but hilariously spot on, right? We've all probably had that experience with someone. And some of us are lucky enough to have a partner like that, but it is also something that can gradually be developed. But I think this too requires a conversation that I realize that this is something I do. I totally get how annoying it is. And I really want to change it, but I need your help. And that's where you say I statements, right? This is how it would be helpful for you to do this with me. And I'll tell you what happens. Gradually, it loses its power, the feedback, and it becomes shared humor, right? So that when it happens in my home, I'm like, I don't even have to be reminded anymore. I'll be like, okay, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm going to stop now. It's your turn, right? It becomes something we observe about ourselves. And in that commitment to the relationship, we change. In some families, sarcasm is a norm. So I want to call that out specifically. Sarcasm is not humor. The purpose of sarcasm is to hurt someone, to demean someone, to put someone down. And so if you are thinking about getting involved with someone or are involved with somebody who says, well, we were always sarcastic in our family. We were always hurtful. We used our humor to put other people down. Sarcasm, maybe on a stage with a comedian, it absolutely can be hilarious. But in a close, intimate, interpersonal relationship, sarcasm is destructive. So I think that differentiation about shared humor versus destructive humor is really important. In this last part, I want to focus on relationship repairs. Remember the frayed tapestry, right? Or if you're knitters, you dropped a stitch. Are you going to go back and unwind the whole thing? Or are you going to find a way to try to do a repair? So one of the relationship repairs that's really important is apologizing. So this is where I own the apology. I'm the only one who can do it. So I have to start with acknowledging to myself, that was wrong for me to say that. And I know that hurt my partner. And I need to be able to say that to him or her. I need to acknowledge my mistake and be specific, genuine, and honest. This is not, I'm so sorry, here are some flowers, or I'm so sorry that happened, that happened earlier. I made your special dinner for you, or whatever it is. This is specific. I was wrong when I said this. I know that I did it out of anger, or I was feeling left out and I had no right to talk to you that way. Acknowledge my impact on my partner, right? I could see the change in your face when I said that. And I didn't stop. I know that must have been really hard for you to have that experience with me. And then I need to express remorse and regret for my choices in that moment. I feel bad about myself in that decision that I made, that choice I made to keep going when I could see that you were hurt. No excuses, right? This is really important. Excuses are defensive. Our body's usually a little more tense, a little more sort of upright. Our voice tone, our gestures, defensive. That's how you can tell you're making an excuse and not explaining, right? An explanation, first of all, it says, I had no right to do that. I was wrong. And I have figured out for myself how that happened. And I would like to share that with you. That is a way of asking if it's okay for you to give an explanation. And then agree to make changes. This is where we make not an empty commitment. If we have done our homework and really prepared for this and go through this well, then we absolutely want to make changes. We do not want to be like that anymore, or we want to make every effort to change that. And then finally, we ask for forgiveness. So the second important relationship repair that can be vital to strengthening the relationship are intentional restoration acts. One is simple, spend time sharing with each other. Do something old together. You know how we used to go and do this and we really liked it? Let's go. Maybe it's someplace you took a walk. You used to take a walk there all the time. You both really loved it and just life intervened and you don't do it anymore. Do something new together. You know what? I keep noticing, what are those places with the airlift things? I don't know what they're called. But I've been noticing these things. I went to a friend's birthday party. How about if we go try that together? Something neither one of us has done, right? And then referring back to someone's thought on these issues, have a sense of humor about our blind spots and or our annoying habits. This is my responsibility to develop a sense of humor about it and quit being so serious because I am human. We all have them. And sometimes they're very unique and interesting, and sometimes they're just annoying. Reconnect through kind and loving touch. This doesn't mean sexual touch, but touch is affectionate, right? And sometimes it's as simple as resting your hands on your partner's shoulder and giving a little squeeze as you walk by. And sometimes it's taking your partner's hand while you're taking a walk. There's many ways in which we can show kind and loving touch, and some of them are quite small, but it's a way to do that 5-to-1 ratio that's so important for repairing our relationships. That's an example of a positive, life-building, life-affirming act. We reaffirm our commitment to one another, and we express gratitude. You will all have access to the recording from today. These are some connective couples exercises that can be really, really helpful. I know we're about a minute past time, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you will receive access to this. I just want to mention that when there's power and control in a relationship instead of mutual respect, it's important to recognize that and take steps to remove yourself from abuse. And I hope that you have some good takeaways today. This is the link to the Gottman magic relationship ratio information. If you just go to gottman.com, you will easily find lots and lots of wonderful information that you can integrate into your relationship. Thank you all very much for being here today. And we will be communicating with you once we have this posted for everyone. Thank you so much.